Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Matt Hancock, a Conservative minister since 2013. He joined the Cabinet as Theresa May's Culture Secretary before being appointed Health Secretary just over 2 years ago, a post he held on to when Boris Johnson became party leader. Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary and MP for 20 years and a minister in the governments of both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, David Lammy. Immunologist and Professor of Mucosal Infection at Imperial College London, where he leads the efforts there to find a vaccine for coronavirus, Shattock. Joining us down the line, Merryn Somerset Webb, personal finance and economics commentator, journalist and editor-in-chief of MoneyWeek, and comedian, writer and guest on shows such as The Last Leg and 8 out of 10 Cats, Rosie Jones. Good evening. Welcome to my guest here in the studio. Merryn, welcome to you, joining us down the line from Edinburgh. Very good to see you. And our live audience is with us again. Very good to see you via video link. Tonight, you're joining us from Dover. Thank you very much for doing that. And for those of you joining us from home, do join in the conversation on social media at BBC Question Time in the usual way. And before we get going, I just want to say we're going to do things a little bit differently to begin with. We've had a lot of questions about the vaccine that we all hope is going to get us out of this situation. So we're going to do quite a number of questions quite quickly to you, Matt. And then, of course, for the rest of you on the panel, if you want to pitch in, please do. And, of course, you, the audience there in Dover. There's going to be a lot of questions coming your way to begin with before we move on to other topics. So let's get our first question from Mark Reynolds.
So my question is to you, Matt, is how many people need to have the vaccine for it to be successful? Now, we've heard that there is going to be some vaccines possibly before the end of the year, but it's going to be significantly less than we need. How many people need to be vaccinated for it to be successful?
Yeah, so what percentage of the population are we talking about?
Well, the honest truth to that question is that we don't yet know. It's one of the many things we don't yet know about a vaccine. And the reason for that is that in the trials that the vaccines undergo, you test for how effective they are at protecting the individual and also, of course, how safe they are. And if they're safe and effective, then we can start to roll them out. And the early data from the Pfizer vaccine shows that it looks like it's 90% effective at protecting individuals. So that's great. So as soon as, if it passes the safety data, and you know, that is a big hurdle that it still hasn't gone over, then we can start rolling it out, and it starts protecting people as soon as they've had, it's a week or so after the second dose.
But what you don't know at the moment then is whether it needs to be 50% of the population or 70% of the population. We're still not there.
Because the evidence from the trial is how much it protects an individual, and you can only find out once a lot of people have taken it, what the direct impact is on stopping the spread of the disease.
Because this particular vaccine, Robin, we don't know if it stops people catching coronavirus, but we do know that it stops them getting, or stops 90% of them getting sick from it.
Yes, so, I mean, it is really early. We know that it prevents people developing disease for a period of time that it's been studied. We don't know whether it will protect people for 6 months, for 12 months, and we have no information right now as to whether it will prevent transmission. So that means its first priority is actually to use it to protect vulnerable populations.
We have a question exactly on that from John.
Can the government confirm that if and when the vaccine is approved, it will be distributed strictly based upon clinical needs?
Yes, that is our proposal. We have a committee that is made up of clinicians and experts that advises me as Health Secretary in my formal capacity at the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations. And this group looks at the data from a vaccine, and they've been working closely with Pfizer and AstraZeneca on the 2 early vaccines, and works out what is the best clinical way of protecting most people. And they've put out an interim recommendation, which is that first we should vaccinate people who are resident in care homes and the people who work looking after them, and then health and social care workers, and then come essentially down the age range, Because for all the different things like obesity that we know has an impact on your vulnerability to COVID, we know that your age is the single biggest factor by a long stretch. And so the answer, very, very simple answer to your question, yes, we will vaccinate according to clinical priority, because that's how we save the most lives.
And John, is this a particular concern for you? Is that why you've asked the question?
No, I've asked the question because I'm obviously the eldest person here this evening on the virtual panel, probably in the whole audience. But obviously I would be one of those down the line to be affected. I would not be in the first tranche, but I'm well over 70 now, so I would be fairly close to that. I've heard of quite a few people who are concerned about having the vaccine. But I personally wouldn't even hesitate having it because I know a lot of people that are very scared at the moment, simple as that.
And Rosie, is it clear to you when someone in your situation might get the vaccine?
No, not really. And I know you've mentioned care workers, and what about people who still need to work? What about teachers? What about people who work in supermarkets? Where in the line do they come?
Yeah, so the clinical priority is all about protecting people according to essentially their risk from the virus. And so after we've gone down to the over 65s, according to the proposal, on the data that we've seen, and they may update it as we see more information, then you go to those who are particularly vulnerable from all age groups. And then after that, down to the over 50s. Once you get below the over 50s, there is less of a clinical justification for any particular ordering. That's what's been set out.
What do you mean below the over 50s?
So for people who are who don't have an illness which makes them particularly vulnerable to coronavirus, who are aged between 18 and 50, they are the least likely to die from coronavirus. And so the clinicians who've advised me on this expert panel say that they come after all the people who are either older or work in health and social care or who have a particular vulnerability. And unfortunately, we know quite a lot about who's vulnerable to COVID because of having looked at who's been badly affected over the last 9 months or so.
And the head of the vaccine task force, Kate Bingham, said she was anticipating that only 50% of the population would ever get a vaccine. This was before the Pfizer announcement was made. So is that your anticipation as well? It sounds like it is from what you're saying.
No, not necessarily. We've learned more and more about the vaccine as time's gone on. And the latest advice is that we should go in the order that I've described, and then to the under 50s, but not to children, because this vaccine hasn't been tested on children, it's not designed for children, and anyway, children are very, very, very unlikely to get ill with coronavirus.
I think two things. One, you didn't mention Britain's Black, Asian and minority ethnic population, which we know are disproportionately dying as a consequence. I hope that they're part of the group. There are other frontline workers other than care home workers and nurses. And we can't have 1 week the head of the vaccine task force say it's 50%, and then a week later the Secretary of State for Health say no. I mean, is it less than 50% or is it more than 50%?
Well, we'll get to, I hope, should a vaccine come off, and of course it's still uncertain, we'll get to more than 50%. That's because we've learned more about the details of both the virus and the vaccine.
In a week?
No, the comments that you referred to were some time ago, and the expert body who advises on this has published its interim recommendations a few weeks ago, and then it will publish the final recommendations when we get the final data about the vaccine, about any vaccine, should it be both effective and safe. And those are the two absolutely critical things that we'll look into.
And if people can pay for it, will they get it more quickly?
Well, I don't think that that's going to be possible. And
so does that mean that the government is going to buy up all the doses, and so people won't be able to go to a private doctor or what have you and say, actually, I'd like that. I may not be in this particular phase, I may not be eligible according to the government guidelines, but I can buy it, so therefore I'll have it.
No, I don't foresee that, because it's been hard enough buying this as a government. And the deals that those who've developed the vaccines have done have been with government. So we've bought on behalf of the whole UK population, and then we intend to roll out according to clinical priority.
Okay, let's take another question from Joe Craft.
Yes, good evening. Is the storage and distribution infrastructure in place to guarantee the viability of the vaccine?
Yes, it's complicated, isn't it? Because you need these super freezers.
Yes.
That keep it at minus 70 degrees.
Yes.
Scotland, the Scottish government, I know, has already bought some of these super freezers.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to pull this off?
Yes. So
you sound very, very confident. I remember you coming in here and saying that about PPE at the very early stage of the first wave. So come on.
On PPE, I remember sitting in this chair and explaining how difficult it was, and
yes, but you also said, we'll have it sorted at that particular time by the weekend.
And we got there. But but on this, the NHS is in charge of distributing it. So the UK government is buying this vaccine and the other vaccines, and it's important we have a portfolio, that we have several, and we're buying them for the whole UK, and then the NHS in each country, in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, is responsible for the deployment. It is a challenge. It is incredibly difficult. And in fact, I'd add one more challenge, Joe, to you talked about the distribution and the storage. There's one other really hard part, which is the manufacture, which in the case of this vaccine Pfizer are doing. But these things are hard to manufacture. You know, you don't...
Yes, but you're not responsible for that. What you are responsible for is making sure that people can get it.
Of course, and I'll come on to that. But you've got to think, they're hard to do the science. They're then hard to manufacture. This thing isn't a chemical that's made. This is biological. Then it arrives and you have to keep it at minus 70. And we have the NHS has been, we've known that for some time. So the NHS has been getting hold of the serious deep freeze. And then you have to distribute it. And it'll be a huge effort from the NHS. They're supported by the armed services in doing that. Now, thankfully, the NHS is a very, very significant organisation that reaches into all parts of the country. So the reason I answered when you said, are you ready to do it? I mean, it's something we're working on every day. It will be complicated. It will be a huge challenge. But I'm sure that the NHS is up to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to recognise that there's been enormous excitement about this vaccine because it's the first evidence that it's a vaccine-preventable disease. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the only vaccine. And I think what's encouraging is, you know, if we also believe the news that's coming out of Russia, we will see a series of vaccines coming through which may have different advantages for deployment. So right now we have to work as if this is the only vaccine that's going to work, but we could have a very different conversation in 2, 3, 4 weeks' time. And I think it returns to this issue of prioritization. It's a difficult vaccine to get out. There's about 10 million vulnerable population. And if you started vaccinating in January, given that it takes 5 to 6 weeks to get immunity, and you did 1 million people a week, we wouldn't get that 10 million vaccinated until way into April. Yeah. And that's assuming everybody comes in for their first shot and for their second shot, and you're not playing catch up. So the logistical problem is immense. That doesn't mean that, you know, people should be off the hook, but it's to understand that that challenge is why we need to prioritise the way the vaccine's rolled out.
Ellie.
Hi, good evening. So are we aware at all of what sort of other countries are doing in regards to the vaccine? Is there much liaison going on with the World Health Organization? Because obviously China was sort of first affected, and you know, how far are they advanced in terms of coming along with a vaccine? Is there much communication there.
Let me just get a few questions, then we'll put them to Matt and possibly to David as well. Marie.
Hi, I was just wondering whether the government could foresee any potential supply issues after the dreaded Brexit at the end of the year, and whether that will cause any transportation issues with the vaccine coming into the UK.
Well, I think we might come to that point in a moment, so I'm going to park that. Oh, park it. That's obviously been one of the big issues. Eamon.
Yeah, so it's, I guess, more of a statement than a question, but I think that Matt is really underestimating the massive challenges that we're going to have with the supply and distribution of this product. Because I've seen firsthand with the flu vaccination campaign this flu season, we've had massive issues with pharmacies running out of stock, using up their stock quite quickly and not being able to replenish that stock. GP surgeries being out of stock for having to wait for more than a month to get new stock in.
And Eamon, you're saying that as a pharmacist. It's worth just repeating the words of Professor John Bell of Oxford University, who predicted with some confidence, he said, that life could be back to normal by spring, with the big caveat, provided they don't screw up the distribution.
So I just want to respond to Eamon's point, because I totally agree with Eamon. And as a pharmacist, you'll have seen this. The question I was asked was, can we do it? And my answer to that is, yes, we can.
Well, no, the question was, is the storage and distribution infrastructure in place to guarantee it?
But is this going to be an enormous challenge? Of course. This will be one of the biggest civilian operations in history. And I think that it will have all the challenges that Eamon set out. But I think that the NHS can rise to them. And I think that we can come together and we can help make it happen. So that's what I'm confident that we can make it happen. I'm also highly confident that it'll be extremely difficult and one of the biggest logistical exercises this country's ever seen. And you're right, that there have been huge challenges in so many parts of the response to this coronavirus, huge challenges, and we've learned a huge amount all the way through. And it hasn't been easy, but we've got through so many of those challenges in the past.
I'm sorry, Matt, but it's just a bit facile when you say things like, yes, we can. The point is that we've heard there have been problems just getting out the flu vaccine this year. And we've still got to do more, obviously, because flu runs with us right into the spring. We know that you blew 500 million on PPE that didn't work. We know that it's now 9 months and 12 days since the first infection in York, and we still, in the 6th richest economy in the world, have not got a successful test, track and trace system. And so in the end, this is about public confidence. We need people to believe and to take the vaccine, but I think you're being asked, can you do it, given that these freezers of minus 70 are necessary to get this distributed? And you can understand why people are slightly nervous that we're going to be well into the summer before this vaccine is properly rolled out.
Well, all I'd say is that it's not can I do it, it's can we do it, right? This is something that we as a nation need to do together, with the NHS obviously in the lead.
Well, hang on a minute.
But that's all very well. Fridge freezers of minus 70.
No, because everybody coming forward to be vaccinated, everybody participating, that it's in the same way that with social distancing, that's something we all need to do. And yes, absolutely, this is doable. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it'll be straightforward. I'm just saying we've got to do it, and we will get it done.
I think it's very easy to say, oh, it's all of us. No, it's up to you and the government to lead us and to give us the answers that we're not getting as a member of this country, a country that I love. I'm worried and I'm to get to because I'm not getting any answers.
Well, ask the questions, and we will try to answer them. One of the challenges of the pandemic is there are all sorts of questions that everybody wants an answer to.
All right. Well, let's take some more questions from our audience. Donna.
Thank you. A recent survey found that around 1 in 6 British people were unlikely to agree to being vaccinated against coronavirus. What, in your opinion, in the opinion of the panel, is the best way to reassure the public that the new COVID-19 vaccine will be both effective and safe?
Before you answer that, Matt, can I just see if there's anyone in our audience who is hesitating about taking the vaccine, who isn't that sure about it? Who have we got here? Kay.
Yeah, Matt, hi. I'm concerned because I don't believe there's been adequate time to put the vaccine through the rigorous testing that we would expect it to go through before being given to the general public. What do you say on that?
And Ellie?
I would agree with Kay. I mean, especially when you look at previous things like thalidomide and things like that, you know, are we really fully aware of you know, the side effects and that could come along with the vaccine?
Jay, I know you had some reticence about taking the vaccine as well.
Yeah, I've got to say, I do agree with Matt completely, because we're in an unknown pandemic at the minute. So there's going to be a lot of unknowns coming up with it for us. So I think staying positive, looking to the future. I mean, during the start of the pandemic, we got all those volunteers apply for helping out. If that can happen again, who knows what can happen? That's what I think.
Would you be happy to take the vaccine, Jay?
I'm probably one of the cautious people, to be fair. I think I'd rather wait and see what the effect is, first of all. But, I mean...
So yeah, at the moment, you're not sure? And Merryn, you wanted in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm not... There is a big trust issue around vaccines, and looking at the different surveys, you can see that depending on the surveys, between sort of 7 and 25% of people will say that they're generally quite suspicious of a new vaccine like this. And so there does need to be some kind of campaign around the safety and the reminding everybody of the efficacy of the vaccines that we've had over the last couple of 100 years. I mean, it's really important to remember that back in the 1800s, you know, 20–30% of kids died before they were 5, and we've put in place a vaccine program since that has brought that down to, you know, 1 in a couple of 100. But there is, around this idea of trust, there's probably a very simple way to make the general population believe in the vaccine and trust in the vaccine, and perhaps at the same time to increase a little trust in our politicians, which obviously has fallen off quite substantially over the last 9 months. And that I would suggest that Matt, you have the vaccine first, and then every other MP has it, and maybe we can rush it out to a couple of top civil servants as well. So once you've all had it, there's an element of trust in that. We wait 2 weeks, everything's fine. Then you can start rolling it out to everybody else.
So you want to wait and basically see if Matt doesn't sort of drop to the floor, frothing at the mouth kind of thing, before you take it, Merryn?
I love it. The population, that it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Well, I'd happily take the vaccine as soon as I'm allowed to. We talked about.
But what about taking it just to kind of encourage
it's a good question, because I would be happy to do that. The problem is that would be putting me ahead of the queue in terms of clinical need. Now, because I work in the Department for Health, I count, as it happens, as a healthcare worker. So if my taking it when healthcare workers are allowed to take it, so not jumping the queue, if that would persuade a single other person to take it and give confidence to others, then I'd be absolutely happy to.
Should we do a totally unscientific straw poll? Put your hand up in the audience if you think Matt should be one of the first to take it. Quite a lot, but not unanimity. I must say, Daniel nodding his head there vigorously. I mean, Robin, I know because I've spoken to some of our audience members already just before we came on, that quite a few of them are very happy to take the vaccine as soon as they can get it, and we've already heard from John to that effect. Some people are a little bit more worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important point. And actually, Jay's position to say, I'm going to wait and see what happens, is probably a common response. I think we need to remember that actually vaccines, next to clean water, have been the single most effective public health implementation globally. They've saved more lives than any other medicines. And people are concerned about this vaccine because they perceive that it's been done too quickly. And actually, we've done a disservice by saying it takes 10 years to make a vaccine. Technology is changing very, very quickly. And what has happened is that the same number of participants have been exposed to this vaccine. This particular vaccine, 43,000 participants. And when you're looking at side effects, most side effects occur very quickly. Within a week or so of having a vaccine, we would see any severe side effect at this stage. And no regulatory authority, whether it's the UK Medicines Regulatory Authority or the European Regulatory Authority or the FDA, will let anything go through that doesn't have a totally squeaky clean safety record. Yeah. Now, one thing that I think people completely forget is that a vaccine stimulates your immune system. It tricks it to see if it's seen the virus. So you're getting an aspect of a viral infection that's so much minor than the real virus. So when you think about the risk-benefit, the risk of having a severe outcome from COVID-19 far outweighs any theoretical risk of a vaccine. And the problem is, vaccines are so successful that diseases go away and all you see is the side effects. Pull out any medicine, paracetamol, you've probably all had it, and look at the safety, potential side effects of paracetamol. If you'd never taken it before, it would probably scare you to take it, but you don't have the same concerns because you're familiar with it. And I think the way we'll build confidence is when we roll it out to vulnerable populations who are desperate for a vaccine to get their lives back to some sort of normality, and we see it preventing lives, and we see it being safe. I'm sure people like Jay will start to see the evidence speaks for itself.
Stuart, you've got a question.
Good evening, panel. Yes, for those that are not in the initial bracket to receive the vaccine, will they still need to abide by the social distancing or even face the potential of going back into lockdowns as well?
How's this going to work, Matt?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a sector of the population that can kind of, you know, go party
No,
while everyone else has to wait, or how's it going to work?
No, because at first we don't know whether even if you've had the vaccine, you might still transmit the disease. That means that we can't lift those measures on just the people who've had the vaccine because you still might give it to somebody else. So what we have to do is vaccinate to protect the most vulnerable and then get to the position where enough people have had it, and we will, of course, monitor afterwards as we vaccinate the population to find out the impact on the transmission of the disease. All of this is about how to get life back to normal as fast as possible. And another reason to do this in terms of clinical priority, to your point earlier, is that the faster we can vaccinate those who are most vulnerable of dying from COVID, the sooner we'll be able to start to get life back to normal for everybody else as well. This is another of those questions that at the moment is unknowable, but the plan to roll out according to clinical priority is the best way to get as fast as possible to as much back to normal as will be possible.
And Merryn, of course, as far as business is concerned, this is the time frame they desperately need. When will businesses be able to open up and operate normally again?
Well, for businesses, this is an absolute game changer, just the knowledge that there will be a vaccine by the spring, and that, let's say that most vulnerable people and older people have been vaccinated by, I don't know, late spring, etc. Then I'm sure has different views on it, but I would have thought that the entire economy could open up properly. And if businesses know that they can move out of this appalling cycle of not knowing what's going to happen, a sort of hyper-regulatory activity, lockdown, tier this, curfew this, rules all over the place, up, down, up, down, up, down, never knowing exactly where they are, if they can start looking forward to a future that is linear, where things don't change all the time, then they can start moving their businesses around to make them work again. So in that sense, it's an absolute game changer for business. And that's why you saw these astonishing moves in the stock market on Monday, when you saw effectively all the companies that are geared into the return of normal life, airlines, pubs, etc., go completely berserk, and all the stocks that are geared into the nightmare that we live now with working from home, etc., fall very significantly. So it means that the economy has started to finally be able to look forward to, as I say, something a bit more linear, less choppy.
Now, Andy, you've had your hand up for a while, but you've also got a specific question, I know, that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I'll cover both if that's in order. My
Sure.
hand up was to say that there's a priority list, NHS workers, health and social care workers, etc. I wonder where the unpaid carers are, that are sort of the unsung heroes caring for family members, are in this priority list, because they don't seem to be mentioned that nationally.
Well, let's just find out. Are they going to be in the priority list?
Well, the defining the social care workers in the priority
Yeah, but these are sort of unpaid carers you're talking about.
Yes, but my goodness, they may be unpaid, but they certainly give
I'm not
care.
downgrading what they do. I'm simply saying, will they be in the first phase?
The joint committee that advises me will define exactly how broad that category is when they see the.
Would you like to see them in there?
I would like to follow the clinical advice. So I know I'm not giving an answer, and I think that's because I think it's really important that we follow the clinical advice.
OK. Andy, why don't you put the question that you have prepared as well?
OK, thank you. So transport post-Brexit is key, as we rely on the vaccine being expedited through customs and other such barriers. How will we ensure that a Brexit post-January importation of vaccine doesn't have an impact on COVID by the two being sort of playing against each other with swaying priorities?
And this is something that came up from a lot of members of the audience, actually.
Well, look, we were told by Boris that we would have an oven-ready deal. We have no deal. We have Boris putting the Good Friday Agreement on the table, which jeopardises that deal. We've got the chief executive of the Port of Dover saying that a no-deal Brexit could cost us, I think it was $1 billion a week, and that traffic flows could be down by 40 to 60%. The clock is ticking. We're running out of time, and it's now looking worrying that we'll have no deal with the European Union, and we'll have no deal, by the way, with the United States of America, because we would have risked the Good Friday Agreement by having that no deal. Look, it's desperately important that we get a deal, that it's frictionless trade, that it doesn't involve tariffs, that we've got food safety, we've got health safety, that we haven't got queues and lorries backed up. And I suspect a lot of people in an area like Dover are really worried, because a lot of promises were being made, and we wait to see what will happen. But we know we've now got days to deliver this against the backdrop. Let's just remember, a lot of people were saying, look, this is tough. We've got all European countries dealing with this pandemic. We've got all European countries dealing with the economic consequences. Let's have a little extension while we work this out. No, we're going to have a deal. We're going to put the Good Friday Agreement on the table. It's a mess, but we need the deal. Over to Matt Hancock.
Well, hang on. Before we get to Matt, Donna, I know there was something you wanted to add into this, this particular subject as well.
Yes, absolutely. On the 1st of January 2021, will Dover become a well-oiled gateway to Europe, or the biggest car and lorry park in the UK?
And it all plays into the same thing, doesn't it? A, what is going to happen post the end of December, but also in terms of us getting this vaccine and getting it through customs, is that going to be a problem? Is this something that you thought about, Robin? Is this a concern for you?
So I haven't thought about this directly in terms of what the immediate priority is, but we certainly recognise in the UK, particularly as we go through Brexit that we need to really ramp up UK manufacturing capacity so that we can make vaccines, and we have cutting-edge technology in this country. And I think one of the things that we recognise is that from a pragmatic point of view, the government has made purchase of 6 vaccines. 5 of those are from overseas. And that's actually increasing our reliance on overseas production.
And you're involved in developing a vaccine as well at Imperial College.
So we are one of the 2 UK teams developing a vaccine.
And are you getting funding from the government as well?
So we are getting funding from the government, but it still requires a huge effort for us to build a technology from scratch. And to give the kind of examples of the competition, there are 30 RNA companies around the world. And
this is the particular technology that Pfizer have used.
But it's a new technology that's at a tipping point. And our competition, our direct competition, are 2 companies in Germany, one of which is BioNTech. And they got grants from the German government of 350 million and 250 million apiece, even though they're well funded. And so we need to think in terms of a strategy as how we're going to nurture a vaccine industry, which is more than just startup, that's sustainable and has a long-term strategic plan.
And are you getting those kind of sums from?
Certainly not those
Secretary for Health here?
But we are getting support, and we fully anticipate that the government will want to see that the 2 flagship vaccine programmes are supported to the hilt.
Daniel.
Picking up on the Shadow Justice Secretary's points, will the defeat in the House of Lords of clauses of the Internal Market Bill this Monday have any impact on government policy, especially with a President-elect Joe Biden?
Antonio?
Hello there. My question, in fact, is for Matt. And Matt has mentioned that there are several companies, there's several deals going on regarding the vaccine. And I just want to know is that these pharmaceutical companies who are involved are making or will make enormous amount of money. And my question to Matt is this: does the government have any strategies in place to ensure that these pharmaceutical companies give back to the system from their profits, to ensure that everyone in the UK who wants the vaccine can have it, rather than we being held to ransom based on what they can produce and what the government wants to pay for the vaccine?
Justin.
Oh, sorry. While this announcement's welcome, does the Mr. Hancock think it goes anywhere near to placating a increasingly apathetic population who for the last 9 months have been drip-fed a series of failures, costly failures and double standards?
Joe.
Yes, I think the answer given that the NHS we will be able to manage the rollout and the NHS will do it. The NHS relies on subcontractors to do the job of rolling it out. Recently, the vetting has suffered, and I've also heard rumours that there are simply not enough medical grade vials or lorries around in order, or even PPE for the rollout of this vaccine. So to say the NHS will do it, well, the NHS can only do it if they get the support, to do their job. So, it would be a monumental waste of money to buy the vaccine and then not having it transported and it becoming correctly, and it's becoming ineffective.
Well, lots and lots of different points there. I'm just going to drag us back for a moment, back to the original question which came from Andy about confidence about getting the vaccine through.
Yes.
Post the end of December. Are you utterly confident? We've had all sorts of warnings from road hauliers about not being ready, about hold-ups at customs, lorry parks, all the rest of it. Are you confident that's not going to be a problem?
We have a plan for the vaccine, which is being manufactured in Belgium, And if necessary, we can fly it in order to avoid those problems.
Yeah, it's a lot more expensive than coming through on a lorry, isn't it?
Well, the importance of this vaccine can't be underestimated. So we've got a plan for all eventualities. And many of the points that were made, some of the excellent points about some of the challenges, like Joe's point about the fact that vaccinators need PPE, absolutely, that's a critical part of the plan. So it underlines how this is a hugely complex project, but it is one that we've been preparing for some time.
So you're confident that Brexit, if we do leave the European Union without a deal, is not going to hold up the delivery of the vaccine to this country?
I am confident of that. We have a plan for all of these eventualities, yes.
Rosie, I think you wanted to come in.
No, just sat here increasingly getting annoyed because I think we're hearing great points and you're just taking an easy question and answering one answer and then moving on. I wanted to come here today and talk about the vaccine and feel reassured that we're gonna go into 2021 and be in a much better and safer place. And I don't know if we will be.
I absolutely think there's a point, which is that this vaccine that we heard about on Monday, it is good news, but we're not there yet. And there are still a lot of steps that we need to get through. So I'm only going to reassure you and anybody else as much as I can be confident about.
You're not reassuring me at all.
Well, I'm being honest about the uncertainties that we still face, and I think that's what I'm duty bound to do. There are some things I am more confident about, like for instance, we've done the work to make sure we have the -70 capacity.
Well, can you even tell us when people might first get the vaccine?
Well, we're planning that if all goes well, including the safety coming through and including the manufacturing going well by Pfizer, we're planning to be able to roll out from the start of December, which isn't long.
I mean, one of the co-founders of the company that is manufacturing this vaccine said not before mid-December. So you're not quite on the same page there, it sounds to me.
Well, as I say, we're planning to be ready from the 1st of December, but we are not guaranteeing that by any stretch. And, you know, it would be easier, you know, in the moment for me to say, no problem, all sorted. It's just not, we're not there yet, though. But what we can see is that we're making progress towards where we need to be, but there are many, many hurdles still for us to go over.
Merryn.
I just wanted to work on reassuring Rosie a little bit, because I think we're talking about the vaccine at great length, which is incredibly interesting and very exciting and gives me enormous hope that we're at the beginning of the end of the whole thing. Yeah. But we're not talking about the various treatments that have been coming along as well. So while we wait for the vaccine to be rolled out and for everyone to get it, there's also, you know, there's a cheap steroid that is working quite well. There's a UK-based company that is in phase 2 trials on using a drug that is known to be very safe and cheap, working in different illnesses that could work very well for this, and in clinical trials is shown to be. So it's not just about the vaccine, it's also about the fact that we know there are good treatments there, that we know that death rates have been falling during this second wave over the first wave among older people in particular. We know that the mortality rate as a whole is very low, and we're also learning more and more and more about how and where it transmits. So I'm sure we may get onto whether lockdown is a good idea or not later, but we know, for example, that you don't normally get COVID when you're out shopping, for example. So, you know, we're beginning to know more and more about how we can live relatively normal lives with good treatments, regardless of exactly when the vaccine is rolled out or not.
And Merryn, you haven't had a chance to answer the question about trying to get the vaccine through if we leave the EU without a deal.
Well, I think I have to leave that one to Matt, because I'm sure there are special arrangements for getting vaccines through very long lorry queues. and about which I don't know but I really, really hope that the government has organised. For the wider question is presumably about Brexit and whether there'll be very long lorry queues in Dover if we go through with on WTO terms as opposed to with a specific FTA. And the answer to that is that there probably will be very long queues in Dover, but there probably will be long lorry queues regardless of whether we have a deal or not, because all change that involves lots of pieces of paper and admin and new types of organization results in difficulties and holdups and blockages. But that will, I would guess, only last 2 or 3 months before we come out the other end, and that'll be unpleasant for the people who are involved in it. But if you believe that Brexit is a good thing for the country long term, it will end up being seen a relatively small price to pay, I hope.
Let's take another question now on a different topic from Jamie.
Hello, panel. So having had a Disability Discrimination Act for 25 years, are we now treating people with more respect and equality?
Well, Rose, I'm not trying to pigeonhole you here, but I mean, you're in a sense, you're the obvious person to answer it first. I know, I can't imagine. But give us the benefit of your experience.
So the Disability Act came in 1995. I was 5 years old, and without a doubt, my life has been better because of it. I had an education at a mainstream school. I went to university, I got a job, and with my cerebral palsy, I've been a successful an independent human being, and I am proud of who I am, and I can wee in disabled toilets and park where I want because of this groundbreaking Disability Act. Saying that, we're 25 years old, and whenever I walk in the street alone, I wear headphones because of how I walk and I talk. I get abuse on a daily basis. I am not alone in that. I am not alone in that. I have had times of unemployment. Unemployment is huge amongst disabled people. I tried to apply for jobs, and I have been hung up on because of how I speak. And I'm not alone, because right now 250,000 disabled people are unemployed, and because of COVID, that is rising. I was gonna say that disabled people are overlooked, but they're not. They are deliberately ignored because disabled people need more care and more money, and I don't feel like, as a disabled person, I am getting the care and support I need right now.
David?
Well, I mean, it's hard to follow that.
It is. I mean,
and that was very moving to listen to. Look, I suspect, of course, there's been progress over the last 25 years, but we've got a long way to go. And let me just say, I have 3 children, and one of them has got a special sort of educational needs. And I know the struggle of parents in this country when they're trying to get a statement. Of course, there's still huge discrimination in employment. I was thinking of the young black man dragged out of the Oxford Union, blind, just a year or so ago. I think that there's a lot to do in this country, and we probably have to return to the legislation that's required. If you look at that story of the 20th century, it's a lot of people at the beginning of that century, certainly the disabled, anyone with educational needs, black and brown people, women, working people, all oppressed in some ways, put down, and by the end of the 20th century beginning to get their rights. But we are still on that journey. And as we go into a deep recession, we know that the people who can be deeply affected are those with disabilities. And let me just say, if you defund local authorities like we have in this country, if you've got local authorities like Croydon, Northampton going bust, with budgets cut of 50%, where is the money for adult social care that the disabled depend on? Where is the money for the kit and equipment that people need in their homes? All the money being cut in day centres right across the country. So it's not a rosy picture. In some ways, it feels like a rolling back. And I endorse what's been said.
Robin.
I mean, I think that the point is that in terms of either being overlooked or deliberately ignored is something that society continues to need to be challenged on. And disability comes in many shapes. Visible disability often leads to abuse, but also I'm very conscious one of my daughters has a chromosomal abnormality. She has no physical disability, but she's disadvantaged by a hidden disability. And I think that's also a problem, a hidden problem that people don't necessarily recognise. And I think it's so critical that individuals like yourself, Rosie, challenge the rest of society repeatedly. The fight needs to go on, and we can never be, relaxed and not challenge ourselves, whether it's disability or any type of prejudice.
Merryn.
I haven't much to add to that, to be honest, except for just to say that from what we hear, it's perfectly obvious that there are not that many families in the UK that aren't in some way touched by the difficulties of having someone with a disability inside their family. And obviously there's a lot more to be done to help everybody with that. But I would also say that we mustn't underestimate how far we've come over the last 25 years. I mean, everybody now understands, which I don't think they did then, that lack of access to transport, to buildings, to education, to employment, etc., was a travesty, and now is considered to be something that everyone should have access to. So there has been huge change over the last 25 years. Obviously, there's a long way to go, but we must remember how far we've come as well.
I mean, I was quite surprised to learn that rules on accessible public transport come into force for buses and coaches from the end of this year, which is actually so many years after the Disability Discrimination Act. I mean, rail replacement buses, for example, 60% of them are not accessible. There's quite a few hands up. Emily.
Thank you. I just want to say applaud Rosie for challenging you all on that, but also I want to raise an issue that was just mentioned about SEN and children that are struggling in schools. The delays in diagnosis for neurodifferences at the moment is over 3 years in many areas, including Kent, and COVID is only going to increase that delay. The Disability Discrimination Act gave us the rights to education. There are lots of children that are not able to access education because they're still waiting for a diagnosis. What is going to be done about that?
Donna.
I think we need to remember that any one of us can become disabled at any point in time. So when we're supporting and increasing access for disabled people, we're actually supporting ourselves, we're supporting the entire country. So I think looking at this as issues that's just for disabled people is just, I don't think it's helpful. It's about how do we increase access for all of us, including disabled people. And that's how we should look at this.
Daniel?
Is it a matter of adding new legislation or becoming a less judgmental society?
Well, I admire you so much, Rosie, for the way that you articulate this. And I thought what Emily said was so strong. In a small way, I am neurodiverse, I'm dyslexic. And it took me until I was 18 until I was diagnosed. And then I got the support I need, and it made an enormous difference to me. But I was lucky because I was essentially able to get by on my maths and despite the fact that my language skills were very poor, at my written language skills at school. So I've felt, just a tiny bit of what that feels like. But I think that Daniel's point is just so important, which is, of course, legislation's important, and that is something we should always be pushing forward, like with the change of the buses at the end of this year. I didn't know about that. I think that's really important, but my God, how long has it taken us to get to this point? But it's also about society accepting everyone and looking for the good in everyone. I think that everyone has something to contribute, and we need to go and it's our task, our mission is to go and find what is good in people and the contribution they can make, and bring it out and support people to do that. So I think there's a long way to go.
Rosie, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to give you a final word on that.
I think I kicked myself without talking about the change between the DLA disability living allowance to the personal independence payment, because 650,000 disabled people, including myself, got caught, and that just makes me insanely angry. That I thought when I was assessed in 2008, that money that kept me going, that gave me support, it was taken off me. And luckily, I can work harder, I can push myself, but a lot of disabled people are now on the poverty line because they were assessed by a stranger for 10 minutes who would look at them and go, what do you need? That just makes my blood boil. And yeah, I want to end it by going, stop ignoring disabled people. We make up 22% of the population. We're here and we're worth listening to.
Rosie, look at that. If the people were here in this studio with us, you'd hear the applause. You can only see it, but there you are. Well, I want to give you the final word on that, Rosie, and I'm very glad I did. Our time is up. Tonight, our questions came from Dover, and next week we'll be joined by an audience in Windsor, and the week after that, Swansea. So do get in touch. You are what makes Question Time what it is. So do get in touch if you'd like to be part of our virtual audience. I do hope you will. And you can apply by going to the Question Time website, and there's an online form there for you to fill in. Adrian Charles is coming up, as always, on 5 Live Now with Question Time Extra Time with his guests, so you can carry on the conversation. I really wish we could, I have to say. You can carry on the conversation there, and you can see on the screen how to get in touch. But for now, thank you very much to the panel. Merryn, thank you for joining us from Edinburgh, and of course to our virtual audience from Dover, thank you, and thank you at home for watching from Question Time. Bye-bye.
podcast was the most listened to podcast on BBC Sounds between July and September, and you can see why next.